What does it mean when even gods remember how to die? Long before the Imperium learned to fear the dark between stars, there was a shadow that taught the galaxy the shape of death itself. It did not rage, it did not hate, it simply harvested. And when the first fires bloomed across Ultramar, when cities of marble and scripture turned to glass beneath a sunless side, the ancients knew a forbidden truth had returned. Not a demon, not a Xenos warlord, but a memory older than mankind, walking again. The skies over Macragge dimmed as if mourning in advance, and the stars withdrew their light. Something had awakened beneath sacred stone, and the realm of Guilliman would bleed to remember it. The burn began without warning, no fleet translations. No alarms screamed from the void. One moment Ultramar was order incarnate, perfect roads, disciplined legions, hymns echoing from cathedral fortresses. The next, the horizon folded inward. Shadows stretched where no sun stood, lengthening like grasping fingers across plains sanctified by 10,000 years of faith. Vox traffic dissolved into static and prayer. Crops withered in minutes, leaves blackening as if touched by frost and fire at once. Civilians knelt, not knowing why they wept, only that something vast had noticed them. Beneath the fortress of Hera, seismic augurs howled as ancient vaults sealed before the Codex Astartes was inked began to fracture from the inside. The Ultramarines answered as they always had, with discipline, with faith and reason, with bolter and blade. Companies deployed in flawless formation, ceramite blue against a sky turning ash gray. Chaplains spoke litanies of courage, though their voices trembled. Veterans felt it first, the crawling certainty that this foe could not be slain as others were. Auspec's return showed nothing, yet Marines vanished mid-stride, armor collapsing inward as if crushed by an invisible hand. Where they fell, the ground iced over, then cracked, then bled lightless shadow. The Codex had no doctrine for this. Guilliman's sons fought anyway, because Ultramar does not yield to fear. But fear had already learned their names. In the depths, something listened. A shard, imprisoned within a necrodermis coffin older than Terra's first cities, stirred as power conduits failed and sacred wards collapsed. It remembered stars dying like candles. It remembered the Necrontyr screaming as their souls were flensed into eternity. Most of all, it remembered being worshipped. When the vault finally split, there was no explosion, only silence, absolute and suffocating. Tech priests who peered into the breach collapsed, blood freezing in their veins as visions of skeletal gods flooded their minds. The Nightbringer did not rise in triumph. It unfolded, like a shadow stretching after a long sleep, its presence drinking the light from the chamber until even faith felt thin. Across Ultramar, night fell at midday. The entity moved without haste, drifting above cities that had never known defeat. Where its gaze lingered, life ended not violently, but completely. Men aged to dust in seconds. Titans faltered as their princeps felt their own mortality scream inside their skulls. Void shields guttered and died, not breached, but forgotten. The Nightbringer carried no weapon, yet all things became weapons against themselves in its presence. Even the Space Marines, transhuman and gene-forged, felt the ancient terror clawing at instincts buried beneath centuries of indoctrination. This was not war. This was culling. Death, reclaimed as a god's personal domain. Roboute Guilliman returned to a realm already mourning. The Primarch's fleet translated into a system choking on ash and silence. From orbit, Macragge bore scars like open wounds, entire continents darkened as if scorched by an unseen brand. Guilliman stood upon the stratagem deck, silent, his expression carved from stone, yet his hands trembled. He knew this enemy from half-remembered archives and redacted myths, the star god who taught mortals the inevitability of endings. Orders were given with perfect clarity, but even Guilliman could not command hope into existence. As he descended to the surface, the Primarch felt it, a presence that regarded him not as a foe, but as a fleeting curiosity. Battle erupted in fragments, desperate and futile. Plasma fire roared into nothingness. Lascannons carved trenches through shadow that simply reformed. Librarians screamed as their minds brushed against an intellect vast enough to drown suns, their psychic hoods melting as visions of universal extinction burned them hollow. Guilliman himself advanced, the Emperor's sword blazing with contained starfire, each step an act of defiance against despair. When blade met darkness, the impact rang like a funeral bell across the plains. For a moment, the Nightbringer recoiled not in pain, but recognition. Gods remembered one another, even when broken. And in that heartbeat, Ultramar dared to breathe again. The clash was not victory, but interruption. The shard fractured, splintering into fragments of night that tore through regiments before dispersing into the void. The Nightbringer withdrew, not defeated but amused, leaving devastation as a promise rather than a conclusion. Fires burned for weeks. Oceans steamed. Entire lineages of Ultramar's nobility vanished, their names erased from memory by something that consumed even the idea of legacy. Guilliman ordered silence. The truth was sealed behind sigils that bled light, for the Imperium could not be allowed to know how close death itself had come to reclaiming its throne. In the aftermath, Ultramar rebuilt as it always had, stone upon stone, faith upon discipline. Monuments rose to the fallen, though no inscriptions could capture what had truly been lost. Guilliman walked alone through ruined vaults, studying fragments of blackened metal that drank the light around them. Each shard pulsed faintly, like a heart learning how to beat again. He knew this was not an end, only a delay. The Nightbringer had tasted Ultramar, and gods do not forget such things. As the last fires were extinguished, a whisper echoed through the void, carried on no signal and every signal at once. Death had returned to the galaxy, and it was still hungry. The whisper did not fade. It lingered in the bones of Ultramar, in the mortar between stones rebuilt too quickly, in the prayers spoken a fraction louder than before. Sergeant Valens of the 4th Company felt it during the quiet watches, when bolters were cleaned in silence and no alarms broke the stillness. He had survived the burn, watched brothers collapse without wounds, and lived. That survival felt like a crime. He dreamed of shadows shaped like crowns, of a sky folding inward. In the dream, something asked him why he still marched. When he woke, the question remained, heavy as his armor. Across the fortress, chapels filled beyond capacity, not with hope, but with fear disguised as devotion. Faith endured, yes, but it was different now, brittle, spoken as if it might shatter if examined too closely. In the rebuilt Cathedra of Hera, Canoness Lysandra led a vigil that never ended. Candles burned day and night, their wax pooling like frozen tears at the altar's base. She spoke the Lectitio Divinitatis with flawless cadence, yet her eyes kept drifting to the sealed vault beneath the floor. She had seen the shadows move during the burn, had felt a presence brush her soul and recoil. It had known her, or something like her. The ecclesiarchy preached that the Emperor protects, but Lysandra wondered what protection meant when gods could be wounded. Pilgrims whispered that Ultramar had been judged, that Guilliman's realm had grown too proud, too clean. She silenced them publicly. Privately, she listened. Doubt, she realized, was spreading not as heresy, but as curiosity. Guilliman convened the Tetrarchs in a chamber stripped of ornament, walls bare, stone scarred by impact marks from the battle. No banners, no icons. Only maps of Ultramar flickering with red scars. The Primarch spoke of logistics, of rebuilding fleets and reinforcing worlds along the eastern fringe. Yet beneath every order lay an unspoken truth. The Codex had not saved them. One Tetrarch dared to ask whether the sealed vaults, those predating imperial compliance, should be opened, studied. Guilliman's gaze cut him silent. Knowledge had nearly damned them once. Still, the Primarch could not ignore the data reports accumulating in secret. Energy signatures echoing Necron technology, relic patterns matching Forbidden's archives. Ultramar had not been invaded. It had been breached from within. Far from Macragge, on the agri world of Prondium Secundus, silence fell again. Vox operators reported shadows at the edge of fields where nothing stood. Crops failed in precise geometric patterns, spirals visible from orbit. The planetary governor requested ecclesiarchal guidance, then rescinded it an hour later, issuing contradictory orders that made no sense. Guardsmen sent to investigate vanished, their flak armor found neatly stacked, untouched by violence. A lone priest recorded a final sermon, voice calm as he described a feeling of being measured, weighed, and found wanting. When relief ships arrived, they found the governor's palace intact and empty. Only a single sigil was carved into the marble floor, a crescent shape, half remembered, older than any imperial seal. Within the librarius, Chief Epistolary Varro broke his oaths. He accessed sealed psychic records dating back to the Great Crusade, fragments of encounters with starborn entities the Imperium pretended were myths. The Nightbringer was not unique. It was one shard among many, weapons turned gods by a species that had learned how to kill eternity. Varro saw the pattern now. Ultramar sat atop something buried, something the Necrons had never truly abandoned. His mind brushed the edge of a truth so vast it made him retch. The Emperor, in all his foresight, had known of these things and had chosen to build anyway. Varro wondered whether that choice had been faith or defiance. Among the rank and file, rumors hardened into belief. Some claimed Guilliman had fought a god and lived, proof of his divine mandate. Others whispered that even a Primarch could not kill death, only delay it. Sergeant Valens overheard his squad debating whether the burn had been a test. One Marine suggested the Emperor had allowed it to cull weakness. Valens said nothing. He remembered the way brothers had died, terrified and alone, and felt anger, not at the Emperor, but at those who explained suffering too easily. Loyalty remained unbroken, but it was no longer simple. Ultramarines still knelt before banners and oaths, yet their prayers had changed. They asked fewer favors. They asked more questions. In the depths of the fortress of Hera, Guilliman descended alone. The fragments recovered from the battlefield had been assembled into a containment field of impossible complexity, Mechanicus runes intersecting with wards older than Mars. The shard pulsed softly, like a star seen through smoke. Guilliman did not feel hatred from it. He felt patience. It showed him visions, not prophecy, but memory. The galaxy aflame, gods torn apart. Mortals inheriting ruins they did not understand. In that reflection, Guilliman saw the Imperium as the Nightbringer did. Temporary, loud, fragile. For the first time since his resurrection, doubt pierced the Primarch's certainty. If the Emperor had known all this, what had he truly intended for mankind? The answer came not from the shard, but from Ultramar itself. Astropath screamed as a coordinated signal burst from 3 worlds simultaneously, worlds thought secure, loyal, exemplary. Defense grids deactivated in perfect sequence. Planetary commanders declared independence in the Emperor's name, claiming Guilliman had strayed from divine purpose by hiding the truth. They spoke of a cleansing shadow, of a necessary end to false eternity. The rebellion was precise, surgical, informed by knowledge no governor should possess. Guilliman understood then. The Nightbringer had not merely passed through Ultramar, it had spoken. And someone, somewhere had listened. As war ignited again, quieter but more insidious, Guilliman stood before the assembled chapter masters and did something unthinkable. He ordered the unsealing of the deepest vaults. Secrets long buried would be brought into the light, no matter the cost. Faith would be tested by truth, not sheltered from it. Outside, the stars of Ultramar flickered, one by one, as if something vast shifted its gaze. The Imperium had survived gods and heresies before, but now it faced a more terrible enemy, understanding. And somewhere in the dark, death waited, confident that knowledge alone could finish what fire had begun. The wars did not announce themselves with grand declarations. They unfolded like hairline fractures in marble, quiet, precise, inevitable. Convoys vanished between loyal worlds. Astropathic choirs sang hymns that returned warped, syllables rearranged into unfamiliar cadences. On Macragge, the Emperor's light dimmed not as extinction, but as exhaustion, like a star burning fuel it could no longer replace. Sergeant Valens knelt before a shattered shrine, helm cradled in his hands, listening to the distant thunder of guns. He still believed. That was the wound that would not close. Belief meant remembering what Ultramar had been and what it was becoming. Around him, refugees whispered prayers that felt older than the Imperium, older than the Emperor himself, as if mankind was reaching backward for something it had lost before it learned how to kneel. The rebellion spread with unnerving elegance. No cult banners, no demonic chants. Only governors and admirals citing ancient precedents, half-remembered edicts, claiming Guilliman's silence was the true heresy. Fleets turned their guns inward, firing upon brothers they had sworn to defend. In the void above Thoas Prime, Ultramarines clashed with PDF forces who fought with suicidal calm, eyes hollow yet focused. Chaplain Aurex felt it as he bellowed the canticle of absolution. The Emperor's name echoed back to him, distorted, stretched thin, as if something else spoke it in mockery. When the battle ended, the dead lay in perfect geometric patterns, bodies arranged without intent or hatred. Aurex realized with horror that this was not rebellion fueled by passion. It was obedience to a logic colder than faith. In the cathedrals, sermons fractured. Some priests preached penitence, claiming Ultramar had sinned by building perfection atop buried abominations. Others thundered that Guilliman was the Emperor's chosen, tested as all true sons must be. Canoness Lysandra listened from the shadows, her faith no less fierce, but sharper now, honed by doubt. During prayer, she felt something watching, not judging, not tempting, merely observing. When she spoke the Emperor's name, the presence receded, as if uninterested. That frightened her more than hatred ever could. Faith, she realized, was no longer universal. It had become selective. And whatever moved beneath Ultramar cared deeply about what mortals chose to believe. Guilliman waged war on two fronts, against the rebels without, and against the implications within. The vaults yielded relics and records that made the air taste of iron and ozone. Star maps etched before humanity's ascent. Treatises on containment, not worship. Logs describing harvest events and acceptable extinction thresholds. The Primarch stood amid it all, feeling smaller than he had since awakening in a galaxy that called him myth. The Emperor had not built blindly. He had built defiant, raising an empire in the shadow of gods, daring them to return. Guilliman understood now. Ultramar was not merely a realm. It was a challenge flung into the dark. And the dark had finally answered. The Nightbringer's influence manifested not as a single presence, but as resonance. Librarians reported dreams aligning across systems, visions of a figure crowned in shadow, offering not power, but certainty. Death, inevitable and fair, stripped of hypocrisy. Varro felt the pull keenly. In meditation, he saw the shard's truth with cruel clarity. The star gods were not monsters in the way demons were. They were principles made flesh, entropy, finality, silence. The Emperor's great lie was not divinity, it was permanence. Varro wept because part of him agreed. In a galaxy of endless war, the promise of an ending felt almost merciful. Battle erupted on Taliser, a jewel world whose seas reflected burning skies as orbital platforms fell. Ultramarines fought Ultramarines, blue on blue, bolter fire ripping through shared heraldry. Sergeant Valens charged through smoke and memory, cutting down a former training brother who died smiling, whispering thanks as if released from a burden. The moment shattered Valens' certainty. He screamed the Emperor's name into the din, daring him to answer. None came, only the echo of guns and the distant hum of something vast aligning its pieces. When Taliser fell, it did so quietly, its last transmission a child's voice asking why the stars were going out. The truth emerged not from battle, but from alignment. Guilliman saw it in the data streams, in the ancient maps overlaid with current rebellions. Ultramar's worlds formed a lattice, a pattern designed not for defense, but for amplification. The Imperium had unknowingly maintained a cage one whose bars were belief, discipline, and order. As faith fractured, the cage weakened. The Nightbringer had not returned by force. It was being invited, its prison eroded by doubt, curiosity, and the unbearable weight of endless survival. Guilliman felt rage, then not at mankind, but at the elegance of the trap. In a moment of forbidden clarity, the Primarch understood the Emperor's silence. The Golden Throne was not merely a life support engine. It was a keystone, anchoring reality against principles that sought to reclaim dominion. Every prayer fed it. Every war justified it. The Emperor endured not for victory, but for delay. Guilliman staggered beneath the realization. If belief faltered enough, the throne would fail. Not with an explosion, but with a surrender. The galaxy would not end in fire. It would end in acceptance. As Ultramar burned again, not in flame but in purpose, Guilliman made a choice that would damn or save everything. Orders went out, encrypted beyond any single mind. Faith would be reforged, not as blind devotion, but as conscious defiance. The truth would be revealed selectively, dangerously. Humanity would be told why it must endure. And in the depths, the shard pulsed brighter, reacting not with hunger, but with anticipation. Death was no longer merely returning, it was being understood. And for the first time since the burn began, the galaxy leaned forward, watching what mankind would do when it learned the price of eternity. The air above Macragge hung heavy with ash and the scent of spent promethium. Guilliman watched the fleets marshal, each ship a cathedral of war, every turret bristling with silent intent. Orders were transmitted in clicks and pulses, every command weighed with the knowledge that obedience now carried the cost of life itself. Below, the cities burned quietly, survivors clinging to rituals that felt hollow against the impossibility of survival. Valens moved through the streets, bolter in hand, feeling the weight of empty prayers pressing against his chest. Children huddled beneath broken arches, their faces smeared with soot and hope in equal measure. Somewhere above, the Nightbringer stirred, a presence that listened to every heartbeat and every whispered oath. Even the stars seemed to pause, folding back from Ultramar, as if giving space to the terror below. Every breath felt borrowed, every step a promise written in ash. The storm had arrived, and the world held its breath. The first volleys erupted across Talassar's shattered orbit. Bolters ignited in crimson bursts, turning night into flickering day. Titans fell like ancient monuments, each collapse sending tremors through the surface below, splitting streets, crushing those who could not escape. Chaplains screamed litanies over vox emitters, their voices distorted by psychic backlash, yet the prayers returned warped, mocking, almost alive. Valens ducked beneath the skeletal remains of a ruined cathedral, bolter firing in short, precise bursts. Each shot killed, but no enemy could be discerned. The Nightbringer's influence was everywhere and nowhere, bending perception, warping loyalty, twisting certainty into doubt. Civilians screamed, but even their terror felt rehearsed, as if the universe had scripted their fear long before they were born. And in that chaos, a single thought took root. Survival no longer meant obedience. Survival meant understanding the rules of a game where death wrote them as it played. In the Cathedra of Hera, Canoness Lysandra knelt among scorched pews, candles guttering in the ash-heavy air. Her hands were trembling, clenched around a relic she no longer understood. Outside, screams echoed over the city, punctuated by the distant thunder of orbital bombardment. Faith had fractured here first, splintered by the weight of impossible choice. The canonesses and priests had begun to argue over what it meant to serve the Emperor, when the Emperor's protection had failed so catastrophically. Lysandra's voice shook as she spoke the litanies, trying to impose order on chaos, trying to summon absolution from a god whose light felt dim, flickering. In her mind, the Nightbringer's shadow lingered, not as threat, but as question. How much could humanity endure before even devotion became dangerous? Even the faithful were now a battlefield, their morality as fragile as their stone shelters. On Prandium Secundus, rebellion had metastasized. PDF commanders, once loyal to Ultramar, executed precise strikes against local fortifications, their orders unerringly effective. Vox reports crackled with static, voices whispering commands no one gave. Valen's squad had been deployed to contain the unrest, but he felt it wasn't war. They were responding to something older than Mars, older than the Emperor's edicts. Each encounter left bodies arranged with impossible symmetry, each victory hollow. Soldiers spoke of visions glimpsed through tears, a figure of darkness with a crown of stars, offering knowledge in exchange for obedience. Some accepted, some refused, both suffered. Valens wondered whether the rebellion was a virus of logic, a test of faith, or an inevitability. No one could tell, and that uncertainty gnawed like acid at the marrow of every loyalist. To fight without understanding was to invite the Nightbringer's judgment. Guilliman descended into the ruins of Taliser's surface personally. The air was thick with metal, ozone, and the coppery tang of blood, the smell clinging to his ceramite like a second skin. Marines moved past him in silence, their eyes hollow, jaws set, each carrying a weight older than loyalty. Relic fragments of Forbidden's design littered the streets, pulsing faintly under psychic scans. The Primarch's mind raced with calculations, fleet movements, enemy positions, structural integrity. But beneath them all lay an unyielding certainty. The galaxy was shifting, aligning against him in ways he had yet to comprehend. He reached the central plaza, where the remains of the civic monument had been reshaped by unknown forces into a sigil that mirrored the Nightbringer's crown. Guilliman's hand trembled as he traced it, and for the first time, he considered that no amount of fire, faith, or discipline could repel what had already begun. The Librarius reported synchronized psychic disturbances across 5 worlds, echoing the Nightbringer's signature. Chief Epistolary Varro entered Guilliman's chamber, pallid and trembling, clutching projection scrolls that glowed with Forbidden's energy. He described visions not as metaphors, but as maps. Lines connecting worlds, aligning fleets, orchestrating rebellions, revealing fractures in belief and command. Varro's own mind ached from contact. He spoke of truths too vast to hold comfortably, truths that made loyalty feel irrelevant and survival cruelly arbitrary. Guilliman listened, weighing every syllable, aware that acting too soon could trigger annihilation, and doing nothing guaranteed erosion from within. The universe outside their window seemed still, yet its silence carried the promise of eruption. Faith, strategy, and morality collided in his chest, each heartbeat a hammer driving him toward a decision whose consequences he could not yet grasp. In a ruined sub-level of the Fortress of Hera, Chaplain Aurex conducted rites over fallen Ultramarines. His voice carried in a hollow echo, reverberating through corridors lined with scorched banners. Each name he called, each prayer he uttered, seemed to dissipate before it reached the ceiling, devoured by absence. He felt the dead watching, not accusing, but acknowledging the futility of his devotion. Outside, the Nightbringer's influence twisted light into shadow, shadow into instinct, instinct into dread. When Aurex lowered his helm, he saw his reflection fractured across warped ceramite and broken glass. A soldier's face multiplied and distorted, reminding him that duty without clarity was only obedience to death. His oath-bound heart beat fiercely, a small defiance. But even defiance felt fragile, a candle flame in a hurricane. The realization gnawed at him. The war was no longer against rebels, or gods, or even death. It was against inevitability itself. The orbital engagement over Taliser flared again. Spacecraft maneuvered with deadly precision, lances of plasma and void missiles igniting the darkness. Yet the enemy formations moved with impossible symmetry, anticipating every tactic. Guilliman watched from the flagship bridge as one of his captains transmitted an encrypted warning. The rebels had coordinated psychic and technological augmentation in a manner that suggested external guidance. The revelation hit like a hammer. The Nightbringer did not merely inspire fear. It orchestrated, calculated, and perhaps even communicated across the void. The Primarch's sword, the Emperor's symbol of indomitable will, felt suddenly inadequate. Every act of strategy risked serving a purpose he could not perceive. The storm was not approaching. It was already here, folding the galaxy into its own design, and humanity had yet to realize it. Back in the urban ruins of Macragge, Sergeant Valens witnessed civilians torn between obedience and survival. Mothers handed children to strangers. Priests demanded allegiance while secreted rebels whispered secrets of their own. A factory exploded in a plume of sparks and molten steel, yet no enemy had fired. Valens realized then that Ultramar itself had become an instrument, an extension of the Nightbringer's will, bending mortality into choreography. The streets were littered with corpses arranged as messages, bodies speaking in geometry instead of language. He felt helpless, yet defiant, clutching his bolter like a talisman. Every breath brought ash, every heartbeat carried fear, and yet life persisted stubbornly. In that persistence lay both hope and horror. The galaxy would endure, yes, but the cost of endurance would redefine humanity's understanding of obedience, faith, and death. In the silent halls beneath the fortress of Hera, Guilliman traced his hand over relics that pulsed faintly, responding to some distant signal. His mind connected flashes of rebellion, visions from Vero, and fragments from the Nightbringer's influence. The pieces formed an image that was almost complete, terrifyingly elegant. The galaxy's fate was not a product of chance. It was preordained, not by the Imperium, but by forces older, smarter, and patient beyond comprehension. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of entire worlds pressing against his shoulders. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Faith, loyalty, obedience, all had become tools in a game he could not yet win. And yet the universe did not forgive inaction. The moment before action had never been more dangerous, nor more crucial. Guilliman understood now that the next decision would not simply be tactical. It would be existential. Above Ultramar, the stars themselves appeared to shiver. The Nightbringer pulsed faintly in resonance with the galaxy, as if testing the fabric of existence itself. Armies prepared, rituals completed, prayers offered and answered with silence. The Imperium waited in suspended horror, each heartbeat echoing in a universe that had grown conscious of its own entropy. Guilliman's fleets formed lines across void. Chaplains whispered final absolutions, and Valens gritted teeth through the smell of ash and metal. Time seemed to bend, the air thick with anticipation, as though the cosmos inhaled before the first scream. All across Ultramar, faith and despair coexisted in the same trembling heart. And in that stillness, the universe itself seemed to watch, holding its breath, knowing that what would happen next would not merely change a planet, or a legion, or a Primarch, but redefine the destiny of humanity itself. The sky above Macragge ruptured. Bolts of plasma lanced the void, tearing holes through clouds of ash and fire. Titans strode like wounded gods across the planet's surface, their joints screaming under impossible loads. Sergeant Valens sprinted through debris-choked streets, bolter in hand, muscles burning with exertion and terror. He did not aim. He did not need to. Targets appeared, vanished, and reformed with impossible precision. The Nightbringer's shadow had become a presence felt in every heartbeat, every pulse of heat and radiation, in the tremor of the ground beneath his boots. Screams layered over screams. Orders shouted over Vox grids. Chaos danced in patterns too intricate to follow, too precise to resist. And yet, somewhere beneath the fury, something moved quietly, patiently, observing the Imperium's defiance as if it were the final act of a drama already written, waiting only for the curtain to fall. Guilliman descended to the surface aboard his strike cruiser, each footfall on shattered marble echoing like judgment. Around him, Ultramarines formed defensive phalanxes, bolter muzzles glowing in synchrony, chainswords tearing through shadows that had no origin. He saw priests carrying the dead, faces pale, lips moving in prayers half-formed, their faith burning fragile in the storm. The air smelled of iron, ash, and ozone, thick enough to choke even the gene-forged. Guilliman felt the Nightbringer's presence pressing against him, a pressure that was not physical, yet heavier than ceramite armor. His sword pulsed with contained starfire, a reminder of the Emperor's will, yet even its light seemed borrowed. He raised it, bellowed commands, and for a moment, time fractured. Hope and despair intertwined, indivisible, each marine a line between the living and the dead. Victory seemed impossible, but to stop was unthinkable. The battle's center was a city once named for mercy, now hollowed and echoing with the cries of the condemned. Chaplain Aurex led a squad through the wreckage, bolter chains firing, recoilless bolts detonating against air that seemed to resist impact. He felt each death personally, each fallen brother an indictment. A Marine collapsed beside him, face frozen in shock, eyes staring past the battle into eternity. Aurex dragged him to cover, whispered prayers into the void, knowing that words had no power here. Across the plaza, civilians fled, some trampled by the weight of retreating war machines, others frozen in awe and terror. Flames licked the ruined towers, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently, reaching, consuming, memorizing. And through it all, the Nightbringer watched, patient, deliberate, allowing death to teach the Empyrean the price of survival and the cost of knowing too much. Amidst the storm, Guilliman faced the shard directly. It floated above a ruined spire, pulsing, half-seen, a dark mirror of his own resolve. Starfire met shadow, and for the first time since awakening, the Primarch felt fear, not for himself, but for the galaxy he could not save. The shard whispered in languages older than the stars, revealing truths that made loyalty seem arbitrary, faith a fragile construction, and obedience a bargaining chip in a game whose rules were beyond comprehension. Guilliman swung the Emperor's sword, a single arc of brilliance against impossibility. Shadows recoiled, fractured, and reformed. The ground shook, and the air sang with energy that was not fire, nor light, nor sound, but all three at once. And then he saw it. In the pulse of darkness, the inevitability of death, crystallized, waiting for understanding as much as surrender. Valens and his squad fought on the ground, each movement instinctual. Bolter rounds flew, snapping bone and shadow in the same motion. Civilians screamed, ran, and stumbled over the dead. Valen's mind snapped between focus and horror. Every target fell, yet the enemy was everywhere and nowhere, as if Ultramar itself had become the battlefield and the foe simultaneously. He felt hands' cold, intangible brush against his armor. Some Marines screamed, some wept silently, some killed blindly. The Nightbringer's presence was no longer a force, it was gravity, pulling at the soul. Valens thought of the Primarch above, swinging a sword against infinity, and understood that survival would demand a cost humanity could barely imagine. Every breath, every step, every heartbeat was part of that price. And when it passed, the galaxy would never be the same. In the cathedral ruins, Canoness Lysandra knelt, arms raised toward a sky choked with fire. Her prayers were slow, deliberate, a defiance against everything around her. Sparks rained from above as orbital bombardments lit the heavens. She felt each fragment of flame and debris as if it were a physical assault on her soul. Priests and faithful around her cried, sang, wept, and some cursed. She raised the relic she had carried since the burn, its metal singing against the weight of the world. Faith had survived, but it had been tempered in fire. She knew the cost. She knew the fracture within the Imperium had already begun. And yet, she continued to pray, not for victory, but for endurance, for understanding, for the strength to bear the universe's weight, one heartbeat at a time. The ground split beneath Guilliman as the shard released a pulse of energy that reshaped reality in waves. Titans faltered, entire streets convulsed, and reality itself seemed to stretch and crack. Marines fell unconscious, gripped by visions of stars dying in slow motion, of civilizations erased by principles older than humanity. Guilliman's ceramite burned against the psychic strain, yet he stood, sword raised, anchor against the storm. For an instant, silence followed, thick and oppressive, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. Then came the surge, the combined will of countless forces, broken faith, stubborn survival, and furious obedience, pressing back against the Nightbringer's darkness. The clash was monumental. Stars flickered. Buildings collapsed. And in that instant of unthinkable violence, something primal shifted in the universe, as if the Nightbringer itself was reconsidering the rules it had laid so patiently across time. On the battlefield, Valens bore witness to a moment that would never leave him. A squad of civilians, led by a priest, stood their ground against shadow-formed adversaries. They had no weapons, no armor, only courage and belief. Bolter rounds tore through them, yet they moved with intent, sacrificing themselves to shield retreating survivors. Valens wept as he saw the light of human spirit burn brightest in the face of annihilation. Even the Imperium's greatest warriors, augmented, transhuman, disciplined, paused to honor the simplicity of their defiance. The Nightbringer's shadow recoiled briefly, as if acknowledging the purity of the act, before resuming its inexorable pressure. And Valens understood what the cost of survival truly meant. It was not victory, but the persistence of hope amid incomprehensible darkness. The battle waned. Smoke rose in slow, deliberate spirals. Guilliman stood on the ruins of the central plaza, sword lowered, eyes reflecting the sky now partially reclaimed from shadow. Marines tended the wounded. Chaplains performed rites over the dead, speaking names into the void that may never respond. The shard hovered, fractured but undestroyed, pulsing with a rhythm that hinted at calculation, observation, and patience. Time itself seemed to exhale. Guilliman looked across the battlefield, counting survivors, reading the cost, and feeling the weight of decisions yet unmade. The universe had shifted during the conflict. Faith, loyalty, sacrifice, they had all exacted their price. Yet the Nightbringer remained, the Imperium endured. But something eternal had moved in response, altering the terms of engagement in ways no army, no fleet, no Primarch could yet comprehend. In the quiet aftermath, Canoness Lysandro walked through scorched streets, helping the wounded and comforting the bereaved. Her hands were scorched, her face streaked with soot. Every step was a prayer, every word a shield. Around her, the survivors whispered of miracles and horror alike. Some swore they had glimpsed angels, others claimed to have felt the Nightbringer's gaze on them, calculating, assessing. She did not know which to believe. Faith had survived, but it had transformed, sharpened into something that could both save and destroy. In that silence, she realized the galaxy would never be the same, and neither would she. The world had been touched by something ancient, immense, patient. And though the storm had passed for now, its shadow lingered, marking every future heartbeat with anticipation, with fear, and with the quiet certainty that eternity itself had changed. Above the horizon, Guilliman surveyed the remnants of Talasur, Macragge, and the broken worlds aligned beneath him. The Nightbringer floated, fractured but conscious, a pulse in rhythm with every living thing, every death, every prayer, every act of defiance. The Primarch's voice carried over Vox, calm, precise, yet carrying the weight of infinite loss. Instructions to rebuild, to reinforce, to endure. He knew the battle had ended, yet the war had not. The universe had shifted. Time had bent. Faith had been tested. Hope had endured. And the Nightbringer waited. Guilliman understood that survival would no longer be measured by victory alone, but by the capacity to endure, knowing that something eternal had awakened, patient, relentless, and forever observing. The galaxy exhaled. And the story, far from finished, had changed forever. The skies above Ultramar were quiet now. Ash hung like a shroud over cities that had survived, yet were irrevocably altered. Guilliman walked through the ruins of Talasur, sword sheathed, each footstep heavy with memory. Bolter fire and the screams of the dead had faded, replaced by the low hum of distant machinery and the soft rustle of wind through shattered spires. Survivors wandered among the rubble, their faces pale, eyes distant, carrying the fragile remnants of faith and hope. Valens moved beside them, bolter slung loosely, feeling for the first time in days the weight of survival rather than combat. He knelt over a child clutching a scorched doll, whispered prayers that felt insufficient and yet somehow necessary. Silence had arrived, but it was not peace. It was a quiet carved from sorrow, endurance, and the knowledge that some truths would never be spoken. Canoness Lysandra ascended the steps of the central cathedral, her robes tattered, her hands scorched. She gazed at the altar, the once pristine marble cracked and blackened, sacred symbols now distorted by fire and shadow. Candles burned weakly, flickering in the ash-heavy air, casting long, uncertain shadows across walls that had witnessed both devotion and despair. She knelt, resting her forehead against the cold stone, listening to the soft echo of prayers whispered by survivors who had found courage in ritual alone. Faith endured, yet it had been transformed into something quieter, more fragile, more vigilant. She pondered the Nightbringer's presence, the shard that had moved through Ultramar like a tide of inevitability, and wondered if the god's silence was judgment, indifference, or something beyond comprehension. Even in survival, the question lingered. What price had been paid for endurance, and was it truly worth the cost? In the shattered streets below, Sergeant Valens helped the wounded rise. The survivors moved with a slow, cautious rhythm, each step a testament to resilience against incomprehensible loss. Smoke lingered in the alleys, curling into shapes that suggested memory itself. Echoes of those who had died, of buildings that had fallen, of prayers that had gone unanswered. Valen's squad gathered in a ruined plaza, sharing water, rations, and quiet words. Some spoke of the Nightbringer as myth, others as a god, others in hushed tones as something that had simply reminded humanity of its fragility. Every story was incomplete, every memory partial. Yet the act of remembering became a ritual, a way to honor the fallen, and to mark that the living had endured. And in that quiet, fleeting dignity, the vastness of the galaxy seemed to bend, attentive, as if acknowledging that humanity, small and fragile, had survived the impossible. Guilliman returned to the fortress of Hera, moving slowly through chambers lined with damage, soot, and silence. His eyes lingered on relics that had survived the Nightbringer's passage, small fragments of history preserved by luck, faith, or some unknown law of the universe. He stood in the Stratagem, staring out over a city that would never again be the same. Reports scrolled across his display, noting the survivors, the wounded, and the anomalies left behind. He considered the cost. Cities burned, fleets scattered, thousands of lives lost, and yet the Imperium endured. He wondered if survival alone was sufficient proof of purpose, or if it was a burden heavier than victory. In the quiet, Guilliman pondered the fragility of civilization, the tenuous thread upon which humanity balanced, and whether endurance was an act of defiance, faith, or merely luck. Above the planet, the Nightbringer had withdrawn. The shard remained in orbit, fractured, patient, and inscrutable. Its presence was faint now, a resonance in the warp and in the minds of those sensitive to psychic currents. Varro, chief epistolary, recorded these observations with trembling hands, aware that even the smallest details might be the difference between understanding and oblivion. He reflected on the visions that had haunted him, stars dying, civilizations folding, time itself bending beneath principles older than human comprehension. And yet, despite the cosmic weight of these revelations, humanity had survived. The impermanence of life was sharpened into clarity. Every chronicle written, every prayer whispered, and every memory preserved became a monument to endurance against forces far beyond comprehension. And in that realization, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, watching the fragile creatures who had dared to resist eternity itself. In the halls of the cathedral, Canoness Lysandra led survivors in a quiet rite. No banners flapped, no incense burned. Only voices, low and measured, murmuring hymns learned by heart, carrying memory more than doctrine. Each prayer marked a survivor's acknowledgement of what had occurred and of what could never be fully explained. The air smelled of ash and incense, steel and blood, yet hope lingered in the cadence of devotion. Lysandra wondered whether faith survived because it believed, or because it was necessary for survival. The question had no answer, only the quiet weight of reflection. Outside, the city breathed in shadow and light, silence and memory intertwined. Somewhere beyond the veil of comprehension, the Nightbringer observed, patient, indifferent, eternal. The survivors would endure. They had endured. But the universe had shifted, and all who lived would carry that shift in their bones and in their prayers. Sergeant Valens wandered through a ruined marketplace, observing the quiet aftermath. Stalls had collapsed, merchandise burned or stolen, but some fragments remained. A toy, a fragment of food, a scorched banner. Each relic told a story of survival, loss, and fleeting normality. He knelt beside a pile of debris where a mother had shielded her child. Both perished in silence. Valens touched the scorched metal, feeling the weight of what had been lost and the enormity of what remained. Humanity persisted, stubborn and fragile. Every act of endurance became a story, every whispered word a monument. The Nightbringer had taught them mortality, and in the teaching, humans had learned to value the impermanent. He wondered if survival without understanding was enough, or if it was the first step toward some reckoning still waiting in the shadows of the stars. Guilliman returned to the vaults beneath the fortress of Hera, silent halls echoing each footfall. Relics hummed faintly in the lingering psychic presence, fragments of forbidden knowledge preserved but inactive. He walked slowly, tracing inscriptions that once guided faith and law, reflecting on what had been revealed and what had been lost. He wondered whether the Imperium could bear the weight of knowing, whether faith would endure if truth was no longer convenient. Outside, Macragge's skies were clearing, but the air still trembled with resonance. The shard lingered, distant, calculating, patient. History had shifted, and the galaxy would not forget. Guilliman's reflection in the polished ceramite of the walls revealed a man weary, burdened by survival, and the knowledge that his actions, though monumental, were but a pause in an ongoing chronicle written by forces older and more patient than humanity itself. In the quiet streets of Macragge, survivors began rebuilding, not in triumph, but in necessity. Flames smoldered, structures leaned, and the wind carried whispers of the dead, the wounded, and the uncertain future. Canoness Lysandra walked among them, hands steady as she offered guidance, comfort, and silent witness. Valens helped erect temporary shelters, bolters slung loosely, listening to stories of courage, fear, and fleeting mercy. The galaxy had endured, the people had endured. And yet, in every quiet heartbeat, in every whispered prayer, lingered the awareness of forces unseen, principles unchallenged, and questions unanswered. Faith, morality, and loyalty had been tempered in fire and shadow. Humanity remained, fragile and luminous, staring into the eternal night, carrying scars both physical and spiritual. Above Macragge, the Nightbringer pulsed faintly in the void, a reminder of all that had occurred and all that was yet to come. Its gaze touched nothing and everything, recording, observing, judging, or merely existing. Guilliman stood on a high terrace, overlooking the city, sword lowered, eyes reflecting both loss and endurance. The universe felt patient, infinite, and impossibly vast. Time seemed to slow, stretching out like a cathedral of light and shadow. Faith and survival, suffering and devotion, all existed in delicate balance. And somewhere in the silence, one question lingered. Does humanity endure because it must, or because it chooses to? Another followed, darker still. What is the cost of knowing, when knowing can change the world forever? The Chronicle of Ultramar would continue, etched in memory, in stone, and in the quiet shadows of the stars. And so the galaxy exhaled, quiet, solemn, eternal. Survivors whispered names, traced relics, rebuilt homes and hearts. The Nightbringer withdrew, patient, indifferent, yet intimately aware of the fragile defiance that had resisted it. Guilliman's sword rested, yet his vigilance did not falter. Valens walked through streets alive with memory, carrying stories that would be repeated, recorded, and remembered. Canoness Lysandra knelt once more, offering prayers into a sky that no longer burned, yet still bore witness. The Imperium endured. Humanity endured. And the universe, vast, indifferent, and eternal, continued its slow, observant march, aware that history had shifted, that faith had been tempered, and that survival came with a cost too profound for comprehension. The story of Ultramar, of the Nightbringer, and of those who endured would echo forever, asking, what is faith when tested by eternity, and what is humanity when it survives the impossible? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Leave your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. What do you believe humanity will carry from the Nightbringer's shadow?